Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Pageau. The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Media Clip, Advertech Printing, and School Photographers of America.
Hello again, and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Pageau, and today we're joined by two guests. We have Wendi Flores, who is the strategic partner of Odd Comma, and Steve Klinetobe, who is the creative director of Odd Comma, and both of them are coming from the Pacific Northwest today. Hi, folks. How are you today?
Hey, Gary.
Hey, Gary. How are you?
Good. You guys sound like you're raring to go. First, Wendi, let's start with you and your background before we get into the meat of today's discussion about creativity. Your background has extensively been in photography. You've had some photography clients in the past. So we can talk a little bit about your background there.
Yeah. I mean, I graduated with a journalism broadcasting degree, so storytelling was always such a big part of my DNA. And then I worked for HP for a while, and I was kind of like a duck out of water. And one of our managers left and created print packs, which sold to Mattel. And then Steve and I met on this magical night of creativity. And we started working together sort of in a consultancy that I had at the time. And then we partnered up and created Curiosity Group, which was a creative content agency way before anyone really started talking about content. And from there, we started doing products and projects for big entertainment brands like Disney and Sega, all these guys, Paramount, to add value to their products. And oftentimes they would partner with HP. So there was a printable aspect. And then we started doing photo as part of that. And that's kind of how I fell into it. And then I started working with major retailers like Snapfish and Fuji and Walgreens and Walmart. And that's really what my other business does, is Foto Crush. It creates storytelling designs that are emotively authentic. And again, way before the industry really caught up to that. So it's always been part and parcel to everything that we've done. And I think even in the industry, there's still a lot of non-creatives that are involved in the creative process, and certainly the tools don't lend themselves to creativity. If I could wave a magic wand, I would change those tools that are online or in the kiosk to be more consumer friendly. But we really focus on a lot of stuff that reaches a specific niche, and that's really what melts my butter. Is going after the pet market or the religious market or the European markets, where you really have to understand culture and how they use photo and things like that, as opposed to just stamping a new title on a US card. So that's really what kind of like gets me kind of going, and is highly creative. And I work with designers around the world with different illustrative styles. And Steve certainly is part of that as well.
Okay, so Steve, let's segue into your background and what Odd Comma actually is.
Okay. Yeah, well, besides what Wendi and I created together back in the day, a Curiosity Group, that was an amazing experience. We had dozens and dozens of people working with us and for us. It was awesome from a creativity standpoint. But really what we learned during that time is companies and brands have a hard time expressing the emotional part of their business, opposed to the marketing speak or the jargon that so many companies use to describe what they do and talk to their consumers. So over the years, I've been honing the craft of writing brand narratives for companies that are emotive, that light a fire, that actually have heart and soul. And so that's what Odd Comma is all about right now, is creating brand narratives for companies, not just for how they message themselves externally, but actually more importantly, how they even describe themselves to themselves, how they talk to their employees, how they tell their mothers what they do for a living. And, so all that is just a great way. And I think, where so many branding agencies and so many copywriters head straight towards the more technical aspects of a brand. We come at it specifically from writing. It's almost like a poem for these brands, a narrative that sings more than it just is bullet points.
And that might sound like, oh, woo-hoo, self-analysis, let me get in touch with my personal feelings about stuff. But
right.
Really, when you look at creativity and technology, technology has been expediting creativity for more people who don't have design skills or writing skills.
Right.
And so you get closer and closer to those big entertainment brands or fashion brands that dive so deeply into that pool to generate income. You know what I mean? And I mean, even like with the photo stuff, it's the one product like at a retailer store, Sam's Club, where you don't have to talk about tires, right? How emotively great can tires be? But, photo, man, dive deep into the pool. It's the one product where it's reaching out and connecting because of photo. And even they're afraid to kind of go there sometimes. And I think the more people who get creative, the more they have to realize the level of expectation of that creativity is actually nearing what Cartoon Network will do to grab you and make you watch its shows and that kind of thing. So I kind of feel like that's what's happening is the masses are kind of moving closer and have been to that level of storytelling. And Steve and I have worked on a couple of projects with Odd Comma, and one actually led to a company that had a huge, we're talking millions or $1 billion acquisition out of that redefinition. So it has very practical usages. I mean, you can see it with the photo stuff, but I think most companies, I think they're a little shy and afraid of going.
People don't connect with robots and algorithms. They connect with other people and emotion. And so, in fact, I would say in this kind of age, we're seeing AI become to the forefront of communications, and we're seeing algorithms driving everything on e-commerce and even just so many marketing functions that have been automated. People, and I'm talking real human beings, are craving connections that are full of heart and full of soul. And I think that's that is the power of this kind of work, is it's counterbalancing, not erasing or not saying that other stuff's not valuable. It's just saying it's a counterbalance.
One of the things that I find interesting is the phrase, when you read a lot of marketing stuff, which I tend to do, and you see the phrase authenticity, right? It's got to be authentic. And then when we look at the imagery that is being used, it's almost all literally the same type of photography, the same type of, it's not authentic at all. It's just got human beings in it. And that was, kind of interesting. I also think, there's emotional appeals that are made that are kind of, I don't know, like what kind of research people do when they make these decisions. But I was talking to a group of people I was talking about in terms of marketing. We're talking about like car ads. Car ads used to be very technical, right? Miles per gallon, features, maybe a little safety, but that kind of thing. And now it's all about how much the car company loves you, right? Subaru loves you and all that. And do you think that is actually the type of thing that resonates with consumers? Or are they just doing it because they think that's what people want?
Well, I think there's certainly, that's the thing about creativity. I mean, let's talk about that. It's the heretic. It's the rebel. It's the rabble-rouser, right? It's the person who's willing to smash the glass on the floor and re-look at that. And that's, where Steve and I were working at Curiosity. Like, you can come up with an idea and rip someone off. You can come up with an idea and then tweak it just a little bit, or you can turn it on its head and rethink it. And one would argue creativity is, passed on through generations, and it's like a time machine. You can go anywhere. So is there anything original? Who knows? But authenticity is really from the core of who you are, whether that's a brand or a person. And especially now, it needs to be real. It needs to be real to you, and people will sense that out using like Foto Crush. Like, we actually hand paint a lot of these ombre effects because you can see the watercolor transition. It's organic versus a computer generating it, right?
Right, exactly.
And you look at that and you'll be like, oh, that's a nice card, but something doesn't feel quite right about it versus when it's real. And I think the reason why it's so important now is because you have this need with how the world's going right now, coming off of COVID, you know, whether it's China or it's political or whatever, people are concerned. So brands need to infuse urgent optimism. You know what I mean? And that's what he was talking about, is that connection has to be real. And it's funny because the reason why a company can't do this on their own, find that place, is because they've drunk the Kool-Aid of the messaging of the company. The company sees the company through the company's eyes.
Right.
You know, it's like
the mission statement is all.
Oh God, like don't even start about mission statements at HP. Like we get 30 people in a room and like we come up with a statement of like, I don't know, 300 words, but it never said anything. You know, just because everyone was like trying to compromise with each other on these sentences that literally were like pablum because, you know, they were words that really didn't state anything, but we were all okay with it and could sign off on it. It's just like that. We were so far away from that kind of approach now. But if you can't find that real authenticity on your own, it's because in a way you've done what the company has asked you, to see the company through the company's eyes. But the problem is you have to be more of an empath. And you have to put yourself in the position of that customer. And you have to go, okay, how is that company's products going to integrate into my life? Because that's what I care about right now, right? Like, how is it going to make me feel better about climate? Or how is it going to like entertain me to distract me from these issues? Or how is it going to help me come up with a solution? And we've been traveling that road for a while, but in answer to your question, I think when you see like people kind of copycatting other things, it's because they haven't done the heavy lifting of really diving deep into who they are, why they exist.
Yeah. I mean, I think authenticity is one of the most overused words in creative briefs I've seen in the last 20 years. And sometimes, this is where it gets in the way. And this is why I like working specifically with founders and individuals who started a company, because I'm like, why did you start this company? There was a passion there and a understanding of the market that over time, through your different phases of business, you've lost a little bit of that. You haven't tapped into that mind for a long time.
Or you've had to delegate.
You've delegated.
You've had to delegate, so you're out of touch with the day-to-day.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden authenticity means, what you think is authentic to the group. And honestly, one of the things we used to talk about a lot to some of our brands was, listen, sometimes being truthful and authentic is knowing and having a self-awareness about your company. I mean, if you're a company that's, producing like a toilet paper, you're not changing somebody's life, and it drives me nuts when companies come in and say, we're saving lives, we're changing lives. And it's like, no, you're producing a product, right?
It's a commodity product that people need and want, but if they don't buy yours, they're going to buy another one.
Exactly. So be authentic to who you truly are, and then understand your audience is really what that means. It means understand. Authenticity means that you understand who you're talking to and what really is important to them. And it's rarely your product. It's usually their families, their taxes, their work, their school, or whatever. Or
the job or role they want that product to play.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you're talking about, toilet paper, you want the toilet paper to do the job, but does it really matter that it's Charmin or because it has a happy...
Really apologize for using that as a metaphor.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it might matter to you if it's climate friendly.
Yeah, it might.
Made out of a bamboo, and you might pay a little bit more because, again, you want to know what's an easy way for you, because you can't tackle climate on your own.
Right, exactly.
The world is having an issue. The leaders of the world are having issues doing that. So, you do your little thing and you're like, okay, I'm going to buy that bamboo based paper. You know what I mean? Because I know it's better.
Well, it's interesting you say, because I recently had on the podcast someone on the photo industry who is working in sustainability. And they're talking about that messaging, right, for people in the printing and graphic arts industry about not only being sustainable, but then conveying that, right, to the audience, to the end users, because so they know that if they're printing on, like you said, a bamboo print, that, that is being sourced ethically and things like that. So I think there's going to be a lot of people coming at that issue from a lot of different angles.
Yeah. And, I read a lot about a lot of companies who are just doing some amazing things, and they're small, you know what I mean? And they have the passion and solutions to really try to change the way people do things. And so a lot of like Odd Comma focuses on is, passion companies like that, but like Steve said, maybe you've had a major reorganization. I mean, look how many, like the tech world is little bubble is getting popped of board members just kind of like, okay, bottom line it for me. How much more money can we squeeze out of this poor consumer? It's a point where you're going to go, okay, do I pay my bills? Do I pay for my medicine, or do I buy a new iPad or whatever? And, we're going to find a way to not be the healthy consumers that we were. It's just like this catch-22, the more you force money out of us. So I think that, a business who's lost sight of itself is also going to suffer what's kind of happening right now, which is profit at all costs is not a marketing strategy. You know what I mean?
Right. So let's talk about marketing strategy, and let's get back to creativity within organizations, because I think that's something people really struggle with, right? In terms of, and I'm talking about like the typical Dead Pixel Society listener who is, runs a retail store or maybe a photo lab with 40 people, on up to a big production house that may have a couple hundred people. The challenge with creativity in a workplace is from a traditional standpoint is you're not really lack of control, right? If you allow total creativity, is anything going to get done? So that's not really what you're talking about. So talk about how that's a bad way of looking at it.
Yeah, I've been in a big organization. Just recently, I was a chief creative officer for a company, and the idea of creativity was really repellent to many of the leadership team, where they were like, we don't want this, it's chaos. And I always said this is not a chaotic venture. Creativity is not something that creates chaos. It actually is something that can actually improve efficiency and move beyond people just not thinking through and not problem solving their day. Right. And so creativity can be injected into any function, any process, as kind of a way to adapt that process and make it something a little bit more fluid and challenging for the employee itself.
Yeah, I always say you want to be fearless, not reckless. And this is where, again, you get into the bones of what a creative is, if you want to know. They are an individual who can tap into the childlike wonder that they remember, and yet have a control as to how to like bounce off of it, such that you have parameters for which to be creative in.
Right.
Like for Foto Crush, like I'm doing some pride cards right now for Walmart, which I was super thrilled about, like on many levels. But I don't just like tell them, okay, do some pride cards. I take a classic product marketing approach, product development approach, and I research trends. I certainly research art styles. I talk to people in the LGBTQ plus community. You look at photos for inspiration. Then I put these mood boards together with graphic title options, photo options, and this artboard that they can pull creative from. Then I align that to a specific designer who has that illustrative skill or art style. Because when they do something they love, that's where you feel that authenticity. That's where you feel the love, right? And the connection. And so it also gives them a platform to be creative within.
Mhm.
You know, it's a misnomer to think creative is just like, you know, uncontrolled environments. I mean, that's not it at all. In fact, ask a creative to go into a paint store and pick out, you know, a paint sample, and they are overwhelmed by the number of choices. And so you've got to like, you have to have that control, but
Mhm.
with a deft hand.
Mhm.
Now, why is this important to the audience beyond being a designer or someone who does editorial or takes photographs? And that is, you know, creative problem solving is what's going to move the dial forward.
Mhm.
Creativity is currency, the imagination age, all that stuff that you're starting to hear just means that you have to be flexible, that
Mhm.
you have to be able to, you know, drive culture, force change, create value. And in an industry that, in my opinion, the photo industry has a laggard audience that waits for everyone else to do it before they kind of jump on board to do it.
Mhm.
You can't do that anymore.
Right.
It's just going to be replaced by someone who can
Mhm.
do it better. And that's kind of an uncomfortable place to be.
Mhm.
But that's where kind of Odd Comic comes in, because, you know, not only can Steve and I help and you know, be empathetic and find that core of what makes those companies strong, we can also help them build a company that can wrap their mind around creative problem solving at the core of what every job is. It takes some skill to do that, but that's really where you want to be. And then when you're around people who are like in the deep end of the pool of your brand and your passion, and that's where magic happens.
Mhm.
That's where you see a lot of entrepreneurial companies start. You know what I mean?
Right.
They,
Right.
they start with that. And unfortunately, oftentimes they get sold to bigger companies who then either, you know, take them off because they're
Right. Exactly.
or they monetize them to the point where they lose that core.
Yeah, we've seen that a few times in the photo industry. I think we could probably spend a good 5 or 10 minutes sharing examples that we've seen over the last few years of brands that have been purchased and have now disappeared. But you know, it's interesting to talk about creativity as an asset and a trend when the news today is filled with artificial intelligence trying to do that role. With Chat GPT, I think I said that correctly, and generative AI, where you can create images basically out of a text stream. Um, is creativity going to be passe in the future, or is it just going to be automated to some extent where it's
No,
not?
yeah, I'm not sure either one of those. Well, for one, let me just point out that I often say that in movies and books, when we're taken over by AI, it's usually named something cool like Skynet or something like that. And here we're gonna be overrun by Chat GPT. It's just awful. I'd like I'd like the opportunity to rename it something more sinister. But I actually think that you know, I've come across this in so many discussions as of late with clients and people, other writers and people in my industry who are expressing both fear and, you know, like uncertainty as to what the future of
Sure.
creativity, whether it's writing or art or even music for that standard.
Mm.
And I actually think, you know, I think that's the wrong way to look at it is I think embrace it and say that this is a great tool. This is a tool that creatives can use, but more importantly, that non-creatives can use to
Right.
create and make things, make art, and make, you know, their thoughts and their ideas
Sure.
come to life. But that said, I think that what we're trying to say here is that the emotion part, the human being part, and the fire and what drives people is the counterbalance to the algorithms and the bots that are driving, you know, all these different industries like marketing and e-commerce. And, you know, I think there's going to be, I don't like the word pendulum because that means that it's swinging back and forth. I actually think it means it's a counterbalance, that
Right.
the creative class has to step up into the emotion of what drives their art and make that even brighter and louder and more vivid than I think AI ever will get to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think too that what distinguishes what everyone else can do from what breaks through
Mm-hmm.
you know, is that emotive heart and differentiator and thought. You know, you look at Miyazaki's anime films, you know what I mean? If you think about an industry that is, you know, computer generated and that kind of stuff, and the poetry and the beauty of those films, like elevate them almost above animation, right? Like, and that guy didn't come up with it because he let the tool take over his creative process. You know, he mastered that animate tool at the time, the CG graphic stuff, and created something that was just exquisitely beautiful. And so, you know, again, the core of who you are, the core of who he was, the stories that he was read as a child, you know, his visual and imaginative world, like that's what broke through. And it always is, because that's what creativity is. It's it's like I say, it's the heretic in the room. But as long as they don't go crazy, you know, and chaotic, and that's where you have that kind of control or those boundaries. Everyone needs to get on board and being more comfortable with that. But that's the great thing about technology, right? It's helping everybody, even if you're not schooled in that art.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it was, when you think of the analog to digital transition that photography went through, right? I mean, that's a classic example of people adapting new business processes and new things happened there. But I think when you get into the AI realm, you've actually kind of delved into an area where instead of being a tool, it's actually creating content, right? I mean, if you turn on Photoshop and say, open new file, and you don't do anything else, nothing's going to happen, right? Whereas you can put a prompt into an AI thing and something will happen. So I guess I agree totally what you're saying. I don't think creativity is going to go away. I think it's going to raise the stakes, right? Like you said, that it's going to make people who are at the creative side differentiate themselves even more. The challenge, I think, will be is on the commerce side. Was there enough of an audience there to support that creative person, right? Because if the mainstream stuff is being generated by AI, you know what I'm saying?
I believe that we will always find our way, being as adaptive as we are as human beings versus, you know, AI, which will only get better at this. I mean, that's the thing. It's only going to get better. The art's going to be created. You know, you might be able to walk in there one day and just say, create podcast, and it makes up, you know, two people who are better looking than Wendi and I and sound better and make a great podcast. But ultimately, I think that, you know, if throughout all these technologies, if, you know, it's always comes with the doom part of it. Like our jobs are done. It's going to replace us. But in so many, it's so rare that it's actually ever done anything except create new problems that we have to solve, right? And so it's going to be our job, creative class, individuals will come through with a totally new perspective on art and a totally new perspective on writing and music and all these things.
Exactly. They you know, we see that tool as a challenge, you know, not as like our robot overlord coming to overtake us. Now, you know, if you just accept it and, you know, the whole matrix thing, and you don't take the red pill, then, you know, yeah, you're going to be, you know, replaced by a robot that can do your job better. Like, I really believe that's true, but it's the thoughtful person who's not afraid of that kind of innovation or breaking the mold or running ahead, not just behind or way behind what, you know, the current trend tells you to do. Like I said, like that worked okay. And we've gone through this before. How many templated backends have we gone through? How many templated, you know, art designs have there been? And the trouble is, and I promise you this, especially in the photo industry, everything starts to look the same. Let me ask you, if you're Walgreens and you're, you know, Snapfish, like, why do you two exist? You know, if you're carrying exactly the same stuff. Well, guess what? Walgreens, you know, customer is different than Snapfish's customer. Or in the case of Walgreens was once led by an Eastern Indian in charge of the photo department. He said, let's do Diwali cards. And I'm like, I'm in, you know, but, you know, no one was doing Diwali. You know what he did? He built a business where people who want Diwali cards now come to Walgreens for Diwali. And,
Mhm.
the other retailers starting to get into it. So, you just have to have that confidence, courageousness
Mhm.
to not just want to fall in line. And I think that's the hardest instinct to fight against,
Right.
and as a business owner, you're like, oh, what's everyone else doing? And you have to be aware of that. But
Right.
it's more important of what you're doing and how
Right.
you're doing it.
Yeah, I
So,
think you're right because I mean, honestly, a lot of the photo industry people, no one ever really gets penalized for being the second in the market, right? So making that leadership job is really almost open at this point. I mean, I think there are people doing things in certain categories with certain products, but there really isn't an industry leader per se who is driving the market per se.
no, and I mean, I remember being in a meeting, and this is with like across vendors and retailers. Smartphones kind of started blowing up, and like there was a leader of the industry going, "We don't know what to do. We're all going to die. No one's going to print anything anymore." And I'm like, "No, they're going to take more photos."
Mhm.
And if you engage them, and Gary, Infotrends, I'm a big fan. They prove this.
Mhm.
Like if you're new to photo, not the current market, but new, which usually means younger, and you engage and they understand emotively what they want, right? They know what really melts their butter. So you can't just do the same old Martha Stewart art cards. Like if you engage them, they'll actually end up doing more than
Right.
what the current audience will do.
Mhm.
Because why? Because photo print is legacy.
Mhm.
Digital is, a transitional thing.
Mhm.
But when you want something that, years from now, someone's going to open up and say, let's tell a story here with photo, that
Right.
is print. I hate when people throw up their hands and go, well, I guess we're all doomed. Let's get out of the business and try something
Mhm.
else, right? You're
Right.
not trying hard enough. And if you're not going to, if being status quo is your comfort place and you don't want to move beyond that, then maybe you shouldn't be in the industry.
Right. Right. Well,
Talk
it's
about
interesting
quick
you said
burners.
because if you think about it, the industry for 150 some years has been driven by creativity, right? But yet many of the practitioners, people who own the businesses, are very process orientated. And those two don't always jive.
No, well, I remember, I think it was at one of the CPMAI or CES things that we were doing. And this consultant was telling me, he goes, you know how photo cards started? I'm like, how? He goes, well, retailers wanted to give their customers something to do while they were waiting for their prescriptions because the margins on prescriptions are so large. And he said, so, guy behind the counter printing off your photos, like, one after another. Well, one day he put this like really bad vector-based computer-generated clip art on a photo and called it a card. And so as a creative, what you see is the reason why they did that is it had no borders to it. You could stretch that art across every product within the scope from a poster to a card without ever having to really mess with the art file.
Right.
And that's where the tools were built for that kind of art. And I remember Fuji asking me even a few years ago, they were like, well, what if we went back to that? I'm like, you wouldn't sell anything because, you look at Artifact Uprising and Minted and people want the art that's going to speak to them. That means illustrations, that means borders, that means photos that are tilted, vertical text, whatever it takes.
Right.
That's what they want. They want the professional, beautiful experience, not something that they could do in Word on their computer, right? Which
Mhm.
you could do with art. So, you've got to look at that industry. That's why the tools are so bad. But we have pushed that agenda forward of reaching out to individuals and groups and people who love the thing they love the most and want to express that in a photo story. I think like pet and dog and things like that. Like I did a series for Walgreens and we looked at the top 10 breeds and I looked, they all had different dog styles. So we did this whole series based off of that. And it's the cheapest thing to test because let's say poodles really take off, right? Well, then keep doing poodle. Oh, well, that didn't. What about schnauzers? It's just
Right.
versus like telling the back end to change its back end in order to be able to sell to a niche market. it's an exploration, which brings me to kind of like the basis of everything in my mind is being relentlessly curious. That is something where you just want to figure it out. You don't want someone to ever stop you from that need to problem and solve it or puzzle it out. And if you don't have those people on your staff, number one, you're overpaying for a bunch of people who are doing redundant jobs because you don't have the core people who are going to really move the needle for you or the passion anymore for the business. That's to me the beginning of everything. It's the alpha and omega.
Speaking of alpha and omega, how can people learn more about Odd Comma and your business and how to reach you?
Well, oddcomma.com is the best place to go. We are, Wendi and I are just now forming this entity together, pulling together our talents and our experience together. But, the truth is we work so well together. We're just making this happen very quickly. So oddcomma.com, you can reach me at steve@oddcomma.com.
And Wendi, how can people reach out to you? You've got like several entities people can contact you. What's the best way?
For Foto Crush, it's just Wendi, Wendi, or it will not get to me. My parents cursed me with that one letter change. At Foto Crush, FOTOCRUSH.com. Like I have a crush on you. I can parlay with Steve on any Odd Comma questions through that email too. It's just easier than me giving you a list of emails. So
great. Well, thanks, Wendi and Steve. Great to see you, and look forward to seeing future projects from you coming up.
Thanks, Gary. It's been a lot of fun.
Great, Gary. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.